The rain hammered against the windows of the towering Manhattan office building as Sarah Martinez clutched her worn leather portfolio, trying to steady her trembling hands. At 28, she had already faced more hardships than most people. Twice her age. The eviction notice crumpled in her purse served as a constant reminder that this job interview wasn't just an opportunity, it was her last hope. Ms. Martinez? A stern-looking woman in her 50s appeared at the reception desk, her silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon. "I'm Margaret Thornfield, Mr. Blackwood's estate manager. Please follow me." Sarah's heels clicked against the marble floor as they walked through corridors lined with expensive artwork. She had responded to a vague advertisement for a personal caregiver position for a wealthy individual, but the salary mentioned was almost too good to be true. $8,000 a month, plus room and board, for someone who had been working 3 part-time jobs just to afford her studio apartment in Queens. It seemed like a miracle. "Mr. Blackwood requires round-the-clock care," Margaret explained as they entered an elevator that climbed to the penthouse level. "He's particular about his privacy. You'll be required to sign extensive confidentiality agreements, and there will be no contact with the outside world during your employment period." Sarah's stomach tightened. What exactly is wrong with Mr. Blackwood? Margaret's expression remained unreadable. "He's recovering from a severe accident. Physical therapy, medication management, emotional support, that's what we need. Your nursing background makes you an ideal candidate." The elevator doors opened to reveal a waiting room that looked more like a luxury hotel lobby. Sarah thought about her mounting medical bills from her mother's recent cancer treatment, the funeral expenses she was still paying off, and the crushing weight of student loans. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Mia, sometimes God opens doors when we least expect it." "The position requires complete discretion," Margaret continued, handing her a thick contract. "Mr. Blackwood values his privacy above all else. You'll live in the estate, work 6 days a week, and have limited communication with the outside world. Can you handle that?" Sarah's hands shook as she flipped through the contract. The terms were restrictive, almost prison-like, but the compensation was more than she'd ever dreamed of earning. I need to think about this." "I'm afraid we need an answer today," Margaret said firmly. "Mr. Blackwood is expecting his new caregiver to start immediately. There are other candidates, but your experience with trauma patients gives you an advantage." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Sarah could see the city sprawling below. Somewhere out there, her landlord was probably changing the locks on her apartment. Her cell phone buzzed with another overdue payment notification. She closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer, asking for guidance. "I'll take it," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. Margaret nodded approvingly. "Excellent. You'll be driven to the estate tonight. Remember, Ms. Martinez's absolute discretion. What you see and hear in Mr. Blackwood's home stays there. Some secrets are kept for very good reasons." As Sarah signed the contract, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. The money would solve all her problems, but something about Margaret's words and the elaborate security measures made her wonder what kind of man she would be caring for. 2 hours later, Sarah sat in the back of a black Lincoln Continental, watching the city lights fade as they drove north toward the Hudson Valley. The driver, a quiet man named James, had taken her bags and assured her that everything she needed would be provided at the estate. "First time working for the Blackwood family?" James asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Yes," Sarah replied. "What can you tell me about Mr. Blackwood?" James was quiet for a long moment. "He's a good man who's been through hell. That's all you need to know. Don't believe everything you might hear about him. Sometimes the world gets the story wrong." The estate appeared through the darkness, like something from a Gothic novel. Massive stone mansions surrounded by towering iron gates and shadowed by ancient oak trees. As they pulled up the circular driveway, Sarah noticed the windows were all dark, except for one room on the second floor, where a soft yellow light flickered, like a candle. "Welcome to Ravenshollow," Jane said, unloading her bags. "Miss Thornfield will show you to your quarters. Your real work begins tomorrow." As Sarah walked toward the imposing front doors, she felt a mixture of excitement and dread. She had no idea that the man she was about to meet would challenge everything she believed about justice, redemption, and the power of human connection. The secret she would discover would not only change her life, but force her to confront the deepest questions about forgiveness and second chances. The heavy wooden doors creaked open, and Sarah stepped into a world where nothing was as it seemed. Sarah's first night at Ravenshollow was restless. Her quarters were more luxurious than any place she'd ever lived. A suite with a sitting area, bedroom, and private bathroom, all decorated in rich burgundy and gold. Yet the silence was unsettling, broken only by the occasional creak of the old house and the distant sound of someone pacing in the room above. At 6 a.m. sharp, Margaret appeared at her door with a breakfast tray and a detailed schedule. "Mr. Blackwood prefers his morning medications at 7:30, physical therapy at 9, and lunch at precisely noon. He single quotes S. particular about routines. They help him maintain stability." "What should I expect?" Sarah asked, tying her hair back and adjusting her professional uniform. "What's his condition exactly?" Margaret's expression tightened. "He suffered severe injuries in an accident 2 years ago. Physical trauma, yes, but the psychological wounds run deeper. He's been through several caregivers. None of them understood the importance of patience." They walked through hallways lined with family portraits dating back generations. Sarah noticed that many of the more recent photos had been turned face down or removed entirely. The house felt frozen in time, as if life had stopped abruptly and never resumed. "One more thing," Margaret said, pausing outside a heavy oak door. "Mr. Blackwood doesn't like to be stared at. The accident left him with significant scarring. He's very self-conscious about his appearance." The door opened to reveal a spacious bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the estate's gardens. But Sarah's attention was immediately drawn to the figure sitting in a wheelchair near the window, silhouetted against the morning light. "Mr. Blackwood," Margaret announced. "This is Sarah Martinez, your new caregiver." The man in the wheelchair didn't turn around immediately. When he finally did, Sarah had to suppress a gasp. The right side of his face was covered in burn scars. His right arm was clearly prosthetic, and his eyes held a depth of pain that seemed almost unbearable. "Another one," he said, his voice rough with disuse. "How long before this one runs away screaming, Margaret?" "Mr. Blackwood, please," Margaret said firmly. "Ms. Martinez comes highly recommended. She's experienced with trauma patients." Sarah stepped forward, her training kicking in. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood. I'm Sarah. I'm here to help you with whatever you need." He studied her face intently, as if searching for signs of disgust or pity. "Do you know who I am, Sarah? I know you're someone who's been through a terrible accident and needs care. That's all I need to know." For the first time, something flickered in his eye, surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. "Most people know exactly who I am. Most people have opinions." Over the next few hours, Sarah began to understand the rhythm of his days. Physical therapy sessions where he pushed himself to the point of exhaustion, long periods of staring out the window in silence, and moments of sudden, intense anger that seemed to come from nowhere. "I used to run marathons," he said during one therapy session, struggling to move his legs. "I used to climb mountains. Now I can barely walk to the bathroom without help." "Healing takes time," Sarah replied, adjusting the resistance on his exercise equipment. The body has an amazing capacity to recover if we give it the chance. Some things can't be healed, he said bitterly. Some things can't be forgiven. That afternoon, while organizing his medications, Sarah found herself drawn to a locked cabinet in the corner of the room. She noticed that Mr. Blackwood's eyes followed her movements, and he seemed to tense whenever she got near it. Curious. About something? He asked, his voice sharp. Just trying to understand your medication schedule, Sarah replied honestly. I noticed you have some prescriptions I'm not familiar with. Those are for other conditions, he said, wheeling himself closer. Tell me, Sarah, what do you do when you can't sleep? When the nightmares won't stop? Sarah looked into his eyes and saw something she recognized, the same haunted expression her mother had worn during her cancer treatment, the look of someone carrying unbearable weight. I pray, she said simply. I know it might sound old-fashioned, but I talk to God. I ask him to help me carry whatever I can't carry alone. Mr. Blackwood's expression changed, becoming almost vulnerable. And does he answer? Not always in the way I expect. But I've learned that sometimes the answer is giving us the strength to face another day, or putting people in our path who can help us heal. That evening, as Sarah was preparing to leave for the night, Mr. Blackwood called her back. Sarah, he said quietly, my name is Alexander. Alexander Blackwood. And I need you to know something before you decide whether to stay. He wheeled himself to his desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a newspaper clipping. Sarah's blood ran cold as she read the headline. Blackwood Industries, CEO sentenced in factory explosion that killed 23 workers. Now you know, Alexander said, his voice hollow. I'm not just a man recovering from an accident. I'm a man who destroyed lives through my negligence. Those 23 people died because I cut corners, because I prioritized profits over safety. The explosion that killed them also destroyed me, but I lived. I lived when they didn't. Sarah stared at the newspaper clipping, her mind reeling. She remembered the story. Now it had been national news. The factory explosion, the investigation, the trial. Alexander Blackwood had been portrayed as a ruthless businessman who had known about safety violations and ignored them. The scarring, the injuries, she whispered. You were there when it happened? I was inspecting the factory floor when the explosion occurred. I survived, but barely. 23 families lost everything because of my decisions. I deserve to die with them. Sarah felt a war raging in her heart. Everything she had been taught about justice and accountability told her to walk away. But, looking at this broken man, she saw something her mother had always taught her to recognize: genuine remorse and the possibility of redemption. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because you deserve to know who you're caring for. Because I can't bear another person treating me with kindness when they don't know the truth. I'm not a victim, Sarah. I'm a man serving a life sentence for the lives I destroyed. Sarah set down the newspaper clipping and looked directly into his eyes. Mr. Blackwood Alexander, I believe in second chances. I believe that God can work through even the most broken situations. If you're willing to do the work of healing, I'm willing to help you. For the first time since she'd met him, Alexander Blackwood cried. 3 weeks into her employment, Sarah had developed a routine that seemed to bring some stability to Alexander's chaotic world. She arrived each morning to find him already awake, often sitting by the window with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. The nightmares, she learned, rarely allowed him more than a few hours of sleep. Tell me about your mother, Alexander said one morning during their physical therapy session. It was the first personal question he'd asked since revealing his identity. Sarah paused in adjusting his leg brace. She died 6 months ago. Cancer. She was ... everything to me. A single mother who worked 3 jobs to put me through nursing school. I'm sorry, Alexander said, and Sarah could hear the genuine sympathy in his voice. "You mentioned she taught you to pray. Was she very religious?" "Deeply faithful," Sarah replied, helping him transfer from his wheelchair to the exercise bike. She believed that God could work through any situation, no matter how dark. Even when she was dying, she would say, "Mia, suffering isn't the end of the story. It's where God does his best work." Alexander was quiet for a long month, his hands gripping the bike handles. "I used to believe in God. Before the accident, I thought I was blessed. Successful business, beautiful wife, 2 children. I thought my success meant I was doing something right." "What happened to your family?" Sarah asked gently. Pain flickered across his features. "My wife, Elena, she couldn't handle the scandal, the trial, the media attention, my injuries. She filed for divorce while I was still in the hospital. Took the children and moved to Europe. I haven't seen them in 18 months. Sarah felt her heart break for him. "Do you miss them?" "Every day, but I understand why she left." "How do you explain to your children that their father is responsible for 23 deaths? How do you rebuild a life when the whole world knows?" "Your shame?" Over the following days, Sarah began to notice changes in Alexander's behavior. He was sleeping slightly better, engaging more during therapy, and had even started reading again. But she also noticed he was becoming increasingly agitated about something he wouldn't discuss. "There's something I need to show you," he said one evening, his voice tense with anxiety. "But I'm afraid of what you'll think." He led her to his study, a room she'd never been allowed to enter. The walls were covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and detailed notes. Sarah realized with a start that it was a shrine to the 23 people who had died in the explosion. "I know everything about them," Alexander said, his voice breaking. "Maria Santos, age 34, mother of 2. She was saving money to bring. Her parents from El Salvador. David Chun, 28, newlywed, planning to start a family. James Robinson, 45, coached Little League on weekends." Sarah walked along the wall, reading the names and stories. Each photo showed a person full of life, dreams, and plans for the future. "I've been writing letters," Alexander continued, opening a desk drawer filled with sealed envelopes. "To every family. Letters of apology, taking full responsibility. I've written them over and over, but I can never send them. What right do I have to disturb their grief with my guilt?" "Alexander," Sarah said softly, "have you ever thought that maybe these families deserve to hear from you? Not for your peace of mind, but for theirs? What if they hate me more? What if my words just reopen wounds?" Sarah picked up one of the letters, addressed to the Santos family. "What if some of them need to hear that you're sorry? What if forgiveness is something they're struggling with too?" That night, Sarah found herself in the estate's small chapel, a room she'd discovered during her second week. It was simple but beautiful, with stained glass windows and a peaceful atmosphere. She knelt in the pew and prayed for wisdom, for Alexander, and for the families who had lost so much. "I found you," Alexander's voice came from behind her. He had wheeled himself to the chapel entrance. "I haven't been in here since the accident." "It's peaceful," Sarah said, not moving from her position. "I come here when I need to think." Alexander rolled his wheelchair down the aisle, stopping beside her pew. "I used to come here with my children. Elena never understood faith, but she indulged me. Emma, my daughter, she loved the colored light from the windows. She said it looked like God's rainbow." "Tell me about them," Sarah encouraged. "Emma's 8. Now, she loves to draw and wants to be an artist. My son, Michael, he's 6. He's fascinated by trains and dinosaurs. Before the accident, we would spend hours building model railroads together." His voice cracked. "I wonder if they even remember me. Sarah turned to face him. Alexander, children don't forget their fathers. They might not understand what happened, but they remember love. How can I ask God to forgive me when I can't forgive myself? He whispered. Maybe forgiveness isn't something we earn, Sarah said, remembering her mother's words. Maybe it's something we receive, even when we don't deserve it. The next morning, Sarah found Alexander in his study, holding one of the letters. I want to send them, he said. All of them. But I need help. What kind of help? I need someone to deliver them personally. I need someone to look these families in the eye and tell them that I'm truly sorry. I need someone they can trust. Sarah felt the weight of what he was asking. Alexander, I don't know if I'm the right person for this. You're the only person I trust, he said simply. You've seen me at my worst, and you haven't run away. You've shown me more grace than I deserve. That afternoon, Sarah called Margaret to request time off. She didn't explain her mission, but something in her voice must have conveyed its importance. Take all the time you need, Margaret said. Mr. Blackwood seems different since you arrived, more hopeful. As Sarah prepared for her journey, she felt a mixture of fear and anticipation. She was about to meet the families whose lives had been shattered by the man she'd grown to care for. She prayed that somehow, in the midst of all this pain, God would find a way to bring healing. The first stop would be Philadelphia, where Maria Santos's family lived. Sarah held the letter in her hands, feeling the weight of 23 stories that needed to be told. Sarah's hands trembled as she stood outside the small row house in South Philadelphia. The letter for Maria Santos's family felt heavy in her purse, carrying the weight of Alexander's remorse and her own nervous energy. She had spent the 3-hour drive rehearsing what she would say, but now, facing the Santos family's home, all her prepared words seemed inadequate. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 50s, her eyes suspicious and guarded. Behind her, Sarah could see family photos on the walls and hear the sound of children playing in the background. Mrs. Santos? Sarah asked gently. My name is Sarah Martinez. I'm here about your daughter, Maria. The woman's expression immediately hardened. If you're another reporter, I told you people already we don't want to talk about the factory. I'm not a reporter, Sarah said quickly. I'm here on behalf of Alexander Blackwood. He asked me to deliver this personally. Mrs. Santos's face went pale. That murderer? Get off my property. Please, Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I know this is painful, but he wanted you to know how sorry he is. He's written to every family. Sorry? Mrs. Santos's voice rose. Sorry doesn't bring my Maria back. Sorry doesn't help me raise her children, because their mother is dead. From inside the house, a man's voice called out in Spanish. Mrs. Santos turned and spoke rapidly to her husband, who appeared in the doorway. He was a small man with calloused hands and kind eyes that had seen too much sorrow. What does he want? Mr. Santos asked in accented English. Sarah took a deep breath. He wants you to know that he takes full responsibility for what happened. He's not asking for forgiveness. He knows he doesn't deserve it. But he wanted you to know that he thinks about Maria every day, and he's trying to find a way to honor her memory. Mrs. Santos began to cry. She was saving money to bring my parents from El Salvador. She worked double shifts, never complained. She was going to night school to become a teacher. I know, Sarah said softly. Alexander told me. He's learned about every person who died. He knows their dreams, their families, their hopes. Mr. Santos studied Sarah's face. You work for him? I'm his caregiver. He was severely injured in the explosion, too. But that doesn't excuse what he did. He knows that. The older man was quiet for a long moment. Come inside, he said finally. We'll read his letter. The Santos family living room was modest, but filled with warmth. Photos of Maria were everywhere. Graduation pictures, family gatherings, moments of joy now preserved in memory. Mrs. Santos sat on the couch, surrounded by her son-in-law and Maria's 2 children, ages 7 and 5. With shaking hands, Mrs. Santos opened Alexander's letter and began to read aloud. His words were raw and honest, taking full responsibility for the safety violations that had led to the explosion. He described his own injuries not as a bid for sympathy, but as acknowledgement that he had survived when others hadn't. "I know. That saying I'm sorry will never be enough," the letter continued. "But I want you to know that Maria's life mattered. Her dreams mattered. I've established a scholarship fund in her name for single mothers pursuing teaching degrees. It won't bring her back, but maybe it can help other women achieve the dreams she never got to fulfill." Mrs. Santos looked up at Sarah through her tears. "Is this real? The scholarship?" "Yes," Sarah replied. "Alexander has been working with lawyers to set up memorial funds for every family. He's giving away most of his remaining wealth." The room fell silent except for the sound of quiet crying. Finally, Maria's 7-year-old son spoke up. "Abuela, does this mean the bad man is sorry?" Mrs. Santos pulled him close. "Yes, mio. I think it does." Sarah visited 6 more families over the next week, each encounter different, but equally profound. The Chun family in Boston initially refused to see her, but eventually agreed to accept the letter. David Chun's widow, Lucy, was pregnant with their first child when the explosion occurred. She had given birth to a daughter she named Hope. "I used to hate him," Lucy said as they sat in a park while their 2-year-old daughter played. "I would lie awake at night, imagining all the terrible things I wanted to say to him. But holding on to that anger was destroying me." "What changed?" Sarah asked my daughter. "She's so full of joy, and I realized I didn't want her to grow up in a house filled with bitterness. When I got this letter, I felt relief, like I could finally let go of the anger." In Detroit, Sarah met with the Robinson family. James Robinson's teenage sons were angry and defiant, but their mother, Patricia, surprised everyone by asking Sarah to pass along a message. "Tell him that we forgive him," Patricia said. "Not because he deserves it, but because we can't carry this pain anymore. Tell him that James would have wanted him to use his life to help others." By the time Sarah returned to Ravenshollow, she was emotionally drained but filled with a strange sense of hope. She found Alexander in the chapel, staring at the stained glass windows his daughter had once loved. "How many?" he asked without turning around. "3 families said they forgive you," Sarah said, sitting beside him. 2 others said they're not ready, but they appreciated the letters. 1 family refused to see me, and 1 moved away with no forwarding address. Alexander nodded slowly. "I didn't expect forgiveness. I just needed them to know that I remember." "Alexander, there's something else. Several families want to meet with you. Patricia Robinson especially. She said her husband would have wanted you to use your life to help others." For the first time in months, Alexander looked directly at Sarah. "Do you think I can do that? Make something good come from all this destruction?" "I think you're already doing it," Sarah said. "The scholarship funds, the safety advocacy work you've been planning. But most importantly, you're learning to forgive yourself. That's the hardest part." That evening, Alexander called his ex-wife in Switzerland. It was the first time they had spoken in over a year. "Elena, I know I have no right to ask, but I need to see the children, not for my sake, but for theirs. They need to know that their father is sorry and that he's trying to make things right." Sarah couldn't hear Elena's response, but she saw Alexander's face light up with something she hadn't seen before hope. "She's bringing them for Christmas," he said after hanging up. "She says they ask about me every day." As Sarah prepared for bed that night, she reflected on the journey she'd taken. She had started this job as a desperate woman looking for financial security. But she had discovered something far more valuable: the power of redemption, the possibility of healing, and the truth that even the worst mistakes don't have to define a person's entire story. In her prayers that night, she thanked God for using her as an instrument of His grace, even when she hadn't understood where He was leading her. Christmas morning at Ravens Hollow dawned crisp and clear, with snow covering the estate grounds like a blanket of forgiveness. Sarah had spent weeks helping Alexander prepare for his children's visit, transforming the somber mansion into something that felt like a home again. The locked rooms had been opened, family photos had been returned to their places, and the chapel had been decorated with evergreen garlands and candles. "Do you think they'll recognize me?" Alexander asked as he adjusted his prosthetic arm. The scarring on his face was still prominent, but something in his eyes had changed. The crushing weight of despair had been replaced by a quiet hope. "They're your children," Sarah said, helping him with his tie. "They'll see past the scars to the father they remember." The sound of a car on the gravel driveway made them both freeze. Through the window, Sarah saw a woman emerge from the back of a limousine, elegant, blonde, with the kind of poise that spoke of old money and European sophistication. Behind her, two children stepped out tentatively, looking up at the mansion with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "Elena," Alexander whispered, his voice filled with a complex mix of emotions. Sarah watched as the family approached the front door, noting how the children Emma, now 9, and Michael, 7, stayed close to their mother. They were beautiful children, with Alexander's dark hair and their mother's delicate features. Margaret opened the door, and after a moment of awkward greeting, Elena entered with the children. Sarah hung back, wanting to give the family privacy for their reunion. "Hello, Daddy," Emma said formally, her voice carefully controlled. She was trying to be brave, but Sarah could see the uncertainty in her young eyes. Michael hid behind his mother, peeking out at his father with a mixture of fear and fascination. The scarring clearly startled him, but he didn't run away. "Hello, my beautiful girl," Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've grown so much." The next few hours were painful to watch. The children were polite but distant, their natural affection tempered by confusion about why their father looked so different and why they had been apart for so long. Elena remained cordial but cold, her every gesture a reminder of the chasm that had opened between them. During lunch, Emma suddenly asked, "Daddy, why do you look different?" "Mama said you were hurt," but she didn't explain. Alexander exchanged a glance with Elena, who nodded slightly. "I made some very bad decisions, sweetheart. People got hurt because of my mistakes, and I got hurt too. I'm trying to make things right, but some mistakes take a long time to fix." "Are you a bad man?" Michael asked innocently. The question hung in the air like a sword. Alexander looked at his son, then at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "I did bad things," Alexander said carefully, "but I'm trying to become a better person. Sometimes good people make terrible mistakes, and they have to spend the rest of their lives trying to make up for them." That afternoon, Sarah found Elena in the garden, smoking a cigarette and staring at the snow-covered grounds. "He's different," Elena said without looking at her. "When I left him, he was consumed by self-pity. Now he seems, I don't know, peaceful." "He's learning to forgive himself," Sarah said. "It's been a long journey." Elena turned to study her. "You love him." It wasn't a question, and Sarah felt her cheeks burn. "I care about him. I've seen him at his worst and watched him fight to become better." "I can't come back," Elena said. "Too much has happened, but maybe the children can have a relationship with him. They need their father, even if I can't be his wife." That evening, the family gathered in the chapel for Christmas Eve service. Sarah had arranged for a local pastor to come and conduct a simple ceremony. As they sang familiar carols, Sarah noticed that Michael had moved closer to his father, and Emma was holding Alexander's good hand. "I want to tell you about the people who died," Alexander said after the service. "Not to burden you with sadness, but because their lives mattered, and I want you to know that I'm trying to honor their memory." He showed them the scholarship funds, the safety advocacy work he had begun, and the memorial garden he was planning for the estate. Emma, with her artist's eye, suggested improvements to the garden design, while Michael wanted to know if they could include a playground for the children of the families affected. "Can we help?" Emma asked. "With the good things you're doing?" Alexander's eyes filled with tears. "I would love nothing more." On Christmas morning, the children opened their gifts with something approaching their old enthusiasm. Michael was delighted with a new model train set, and Emma treasured a professional art set. But the real gift was watching the family begin to heal. "Sarah," Alexander said as they watched the children play, "I have something for you." He handed her an envelope. Inside was a letter of recommendation and a check for $50,000. "This is too much," Sarah protested. "It's not nearly enough," Alexander replied. "You saved my life in ways you don't even understand. But more than that, you're free to go. You don't need to stay here anymore." Sarah felt her heart sink. "You don't want me to stay?" "I want you to have the choice," Alexander said gently. "You're not trapped here by desperation anymore. If you stay, it should be because you want to, not because you have to." Sarah looked around at the mansion that had become her home, at the family that was slowly healing, at the man who had become so much more than just her employer. She thought about her mother's words about God working through broken situations. "I want to stay," she said. "Not as your employee, but as your partner in this work. The memorial garden, the advocacy, the scholarships. I want to help build something beautiful from all this pain." Alexander smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since they'd met. "Are you sure? It won't be easy. There will always be people who can't forgive me, who see me as a monster." "Then we'll prove them wrong," Sarah said. "One day at a time, one family at a time, one act of kindness at a time." As the snow continued to fall outside, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. She had come to Ravenshollow as a desperate woman seeking financial security. She was staying as a woman who had found her purpose in helping others heal and discover that even the darkest chapters of life could be rewritten with love, forgiveness, and the unwavering belief that everyone deserves a second chance. The secret that had changed everything wasn't just Alexander's past. It was the discovery that redemption was possible, that love could flourish in the most unlikely places, and that sometimes the greatest healing comes from learning to forgive ourselves and others not in the chapel that night. Sarah prayed for continued guidance, for the families still struggling with loss, and for the courage to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She knew that their work was just beginning, but she also knew that they wouldn't be walking this path alone. The light that had been flickering in the darkness was finally burning bright, illuminating a future filled with hope, healing, and the full possibility of making something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. The end.